Today's episode is titled When Washington State Lost Institutional Control. This is an alternate timeline, and it begins with a decision Washington State could not take back. In 1996, Washington State doesn't just lose a head coach, it severs its internal chain of authority, and the program never recovers. Before we talk chronology, understand this. This decision mattered nationally because it exposed how fragile mid-tier power conference teams were when leadership fractured. And this story is not about wins or highlights. It's about institutional ripple effects. Why this decision matters nationally. The mid-90s were a hinge point in college football. TV money is rising, conference governance is tightening, and programs are quietly choosing between two models. A, centralized power around a coach, or B, distributed control through committees and optics. Washington State chooses the second, at the worst possible moment. What follows becomes a reference point inside conference offices and national media rooms alike. The irreversible break. The break with Mike Price was not about scandal, it was about authority. Price demanded recruiting autonomy, assistant salary control, insulation from compliance and micromanagement. Washington State leadership wants image management, Pac-10 political safety, tighter institutional oversight. Neither side compromised. The resignation was abrupt. No philosophical transition. No secession logic. The program doesn't just lose a coach, it loses coherence. Institutional response, the disaster hire. Washington State responds not with alignment, but with symbolism. They hire Buddy Ryan. On paper, in 1996, it looked bold. NFL credibility, name recognition, booster excitement. In reality, it was a cultural misfire. Buddy Ryan has no patience for college recruiting ecosystems, Pacific Northwest relationship networks, nor Pac-10 compliance norms. National media reaction was immediate and blunt. This doesn't feel like Washington State. That phrase stuck. Wait, this is where it breaks. Because the damage was not Buddy Ryan himself, it was what the hire communicated. Washington State signals that philosophy was secondary to optics. Structure mattered less than headlines. And no one inside the building was truly in charge. From here on, the program isn't rebuilding, it's administratively hollowed. Consequence number one, identity collapse. Within two recruiting cycles, Washington State loses its regional identity. Northwest High School pipelines dissolved. California developmental prospects disappeared. Junior college trust evaporates. Not because of losses, but because nobody could explain what Washington State football was anymore. That kind of erosion doesn't show up in box scores. It shows up in silence. Consequence number two, Pac-10 government adjusts. Inside Pac-10 leadership circles, Washington State's reputation changed. The program stopped being treated as resource limited, unlucky, or developmental, and started being viewed as institutionally unreliable. That distinction mattered. Scheduling leverage faded, media advocacy vanished, conference patience ended. Washington State wasn't protected, it was deprioritized. Parallel ripple. Mike Price finds alignment. While Washington State unraveled, Mike Price landed somewhere far more receptive, NC State. NC State's leadership made a different calculation. Centralized authority, acceptance of competitive gray areas, tolerance for volatility in exchange for clarity. Price didn't change, the institution did. That distinction mattered, and national media noticed immediately. Conference leadership take notes. Inside ACC governance, NC State became proof that alignment could elevate a middle-tier program quickly. Eventually, Mike Price moves on from NC State and ends up at Ole Miss, where he leans even harder into centralized control, accepting the risk as the cost of relevance. Washington State's failure wasn't loud, it was instructive. National media reframing. By the late 1990s, national media coverage shifted. Washington State was no longer discussed as rebuilding. It was framed as politically weak, administratively confused, uncertain of its own football mission. Once that narrative takes hold, performance doesn't fix it. By 2000, Washington State football wasn't tragic, it was empty. No shared philosophy, no recruiting identity, no tolerance for risk. And the most telling detail of all, after one season, Mike Price stopped being mentioned in Washington State coverage entirely, not as closure, but as erasure. That's not recovery, that's institutional memory loss. The legacy of this decision isn't a record, it's a question. Can a program survive when it chooses optics over alignment? Washington State's story doesn't end here, but it never fully reconnects to itself, and that uncertainty still echoes. If you found this breakdown useful, like the video. It helps the channel more than you think. Comment if you want to explore another program's institutional breaking point. And subscribe if you want more deep dive alternate histories focused on decisions, not highlights.